Oh, here's a few news things. The Republican Party, as I'm sure you've heard on the other news, has really gone full in on the big lie, and they're beginning to oppose accepting election results they don't like. So now the Michigan Republicans have taken a step. They now want to make it illegal to do fact checking. They want you to register and fine you and punish you for complaining about their lies with fact checkers. So presumably the First Amendment will hold this back to some extent. I guess we're going to see. But this is quite logical, and it reminds me of years ago, students would film teachers on their phones and find teachers saying outrageous, racist things, and then get the high schools in trouble. And the high school, at least once I read, responded by banning students having phones, which they regarded as fixing the problem. So, until you hack. Yeah, that's true. Someone says he doesn't trust banking on phones. Well, yeah, that's true. There is some risk. The biggest risk is probably at the phone, at the bank, however. Anyway, so there is White House's executive order improving cybersecurity has come out. And among the many things he says is that they're going to require software bills of materials on software purchased by the federal government, which is a very good idea. People have been talking about this a lot since, well, in the industry, they've been talking about this for years, but it really got a lot of attention with the SolarWinds attack, where you would like to know what are the dependencies of this software and how secure are those dependencies and what nation are they written in and stuff like that. So that's now part of the new executive order, so perhaps we'll be seeing more of that happen. So in the spirit of lying and expecting to get away with it, the Republicans have now began saying that there was no rowdiness or violence or anything on January 6th. It was just a normal tourist visit. This is Trump about 3 weeks ago said that they were just hugging and kissing the police. They weren't actually hitting them with clubs and bear spray and stuff, and now they're just continuing to increase that because I think the Republicans have learned that they don't have to be tied to reality at all. They can just spin any fantasy, and since their base only looks at their official propaganda channels, they'll echo anything they say, and so they don't need to make any pretense to tell the truth at all. And so we'll see how far that goes, but in other nations collapsing into autocracy like this, it does go much further to where, I know this, what happened in Russia. I remember a man I knew who escaped Russia said there's two news sources in Russia. This was maybe 30 years ago. I don't know if it's still true. Pravda and Izvestia. And Pravda meant truth and Izvestia meant news. And the news was just records of boring parliamentary procedures in the Russian government. And the truth was all propaganda. So that what they said in Russia is there's no Pravda in Izvestia and there's no Izvestia in Pravda. And those were the only two news sources. Used to be enough to have something on video. Yes. I know. And it remains to be seen how far we're going to go down this alternate fact stuff, where even having something in video doesn't matter. But it was enough to convict the cop that killed George Floyd, which I never expected. So we will see. It's a time of great division. Anyway, so now a bunch of, just to make you even more nervous, a bunch of retired military have now issued an official letter saying that Biden rigged the election and stole it, and strongly suggesting that the military should get involved in in righting this wrong, which is, what we're very much afraid of. Remember, this is what Liz Cheney did that just came out. Before she just got demoted in the Republican Party for refusing to lie about Trump, she organized a letter from 10 important Republicans telling the military not to get involved in the last election because there was a strong fear that Trump would ask the military to attack the government and install him as a military dictator because he claimed that he didn't really lose the election. And he might very well have been planning that. And then, so those military leaders came out and said, no, the military will not be involved in elections. But now a bunch of them come out and said the military should be involved in elections. So that's right. And that's the problem. When the people are divided, and then the people stop listening to each other, and then the people sort of hate each other and chant against each other and march against each other, then the next step is when the military splits. And it's been obvious that this is happening for a long time because we can't even have a commission finding out the truth of what happened on January 6th. We can't even get an independent agency or even a group of old Republicans to do it or anything because obviously a bunch of people, insiders, were involved and they don't want to be exposed. So, and it's come out that the FBI is infiltrated with alt-right figures, and I think all law enforcement and all military is infiltrated with alt-right figures because it's a large part of America. So, we're in a very disturbing time, and this is very much like the build-up to the first Civil War. So, I do not know what can cause this to end. There have been a lot of off-ramps, but the Republican parties have not taken anything. Liz Cheney is quite correct. The Republicans could take a principled stand and refuse to go along with this. It's not just that Trump wants to be a dictator, it's that the Republicans, the elected officials, like 90% of them just line up and march along with him. Yeah, well, that's the thing. We'll see what happens. Anyway, so NFTs are coming out. The artists they're making a lot of money selling NFTs. It's the new hot thing. The strange thing, though, is if you make a piece of art, like this guy made these pieces of art, and then you sell an NFT, the person buying it does not get the art. They just get sort of a symbolic token on a blockchain, but it does not give them any ownership of the art. So it is a very strange activity that makes no apparent sense at all, like everything on the blockchain. Anyway, some artists are making some money that way, and a lot of scammers. It is totally a scam. Everything done involving the blockchain is a scam. But when a scam gets popular enough, a lot of people do it, and there is some money to be made for a while until it all comes falling down. Yeah, here's the other one. You're right. Here's the other side. 100 Republicans want to split from the GOP because they don't like this lying. Yep, there's a lot of people. So, if the Republican Party splits, that would be good. But so far, it's not really splitting. It's pretty much 80 or 90% of it is just staying with Trump. And the people splitting off are just a small number. So the next election is very important. Anyway, it's 10 minutes after, so let me get down to the official stuff. Although I do want to tell you there's a special event on Monday, which I'm not supposed to tell you details about, but this is an opportunity for City College cybersecurity students to get help with their studies. So I highly recommend attending this. They'll send me a Zoom link soon. It'll happen at 6 p.m. I'll have it instead of my Monday class. And you should come to that if you are a City College student. It is an opportunity for quite a few of our cybersecurity students to get assistance. So I recommend coming to that if you're interested. And we have another cybersecurity professional speaking on Tuesday, so these would be good. Yeah. Anyway, and so this is the last 128, and I'm just going to talk about a little bit more about Apple. Unfortunately, we don't have hands-on projects to go with this. As I've said, I had too much difficulty setting them up this semester. But we can at least talk about the theory. So this is unfortunately the theory of how iOS works, and I don't have the hands-on to go with it, which is not the way I like it, but that's all I was able to do this semester. So we're going to talk about the runtime, interprocess communication, and injection, and these are all very similar to what we have done on Android. So attacking the runtime, this is, I think, the part that is not very much like Android. iPhone apps are written in Objective-C or Swift, and it turns out that they don't make every decision when they compile and link it. They add code at runtime using reflection, and they can load new classes and change method implementations at runtime. And this sounds to me very analogous to the way Microsoft uses dynamic link libraries. That's what I understand this by analogy with that, which we've been going through in great detail in 126. So they're object-oriented languages, so you have objects, and they're classes, and they have variables, methods, and properties. So you might have an object called an interface, then it has a name, it's a parent class of something, and then it has variables, it has methods, and it has class methods. These are active components that contain code that you can run, and the instance methods you can run without, we'll talk about it. All right, so the class method can be invoked even if you have not in fact instantiated the class. So you add this class to your app, but you do not make an instance of the class with a name. So you have this thing called a book, and you add this class to your thing, but even if you haven't made a book, you can still use the class methods, because of course you do this to create a book. You have to do that before there's a book, or you might do that before there's a book. Then after you've created a book, then that particular book will have these other things like get title and get author. So that's the idea between an instance method and a class method. So here's what it looks like in Swift. You define a class, then you have variables and the two types of methods here. The same as any other object-oriented language. So you can mess with the runtime. You can modify the functionality of apps by changing the operating system underneath them, which is the thing that reminds me very much of messing with the libraries in Windows. So you could steal keys, force load controllers, inspect a custom encryption protocol, replace methods with modified methods, and so on. All the same stuff you can do with libraries in Windows. Objective-C is the older language for apps and the easier one to perform this instrumenting operation, which I would think of as an attack on it. And so then you can send it a method. You send it a message. They call this method swizzling. You replace the code that implements a method at runtime. So you replace these pointers, which point to methods, and that replaces them by other methods, so the end result is again very much like a rootkit. Swift is more difficult to instrument, but it can be done. And the tool you use for doing this is Cydia Substrate, which is at the heart of most jailbreaks. And that's created by the famous iPhone hacker named Sorik that made the Cydia. And so this is what you have, and it works by changing the meaning of functions underneath running apps. And so there are tweaks called substrate extensions you can make, and these things are loaded into apps. And you can modify what apps do. And then there are filters, which will control what process your extension goes into. So it's a plist file, which are the configuration files in iOS and OS X. And so here you have a dynamic library, and here you have the plist file, which will be the configuration determining which apps will experience this dynamic library. We'll end up having those methods injected into the code underneath the app. So here's mdsectweak.plist. So it's just an XML file, and here it has a string which specifies which apps it's going to affect, and just this one app here. All right. So you've got development environments to develop these tweaks on OS X and on iOS and on Linux. And this is part of why I don't have any hands-on projects. These things keep going out of date, and I couldn't find suitable replacements when I last tried. I'm sure they exist, but you have to spend a lot of time and dig deeply into it to find the current working tools, and then they change again. So here's the main functions you'll use: hook a function, find a symbol, and hook message, these ones here. So the hook function will hook a native function, and this will use a trampoline, which we're using in 127, to divert the execution to replacement functions. So you can change the native functions to have other meaning, which is just what a rootkit does on Windows. You can find symbols by name if the app has not stripped the symbols, which most of them have probably. And you can load a dynamic library, and this is what implements method swizzling for functions that inherit from this object. So all right. So here's an example. You have old stat is defined here, which points to the original command stat. And this is just a common Linux command. Stat tells you something simple about the operating system. I forget what. And but this old stat points to the existing stat. Here's the new stat, and the new stat just prints a message in the log, checking for bash, and then if you're in the bash, then it returns some error. That's all. So it doesn't do anything much. It just prints something in the log so you can tell it's working, and then returns the old stat. Right. And there's the initialize. We'll talk about that. Okay, so here's the initialize loads its content when the app first loads, and that's what the hook function does. So we don't see the hook function on line 16. Here's the hook function. So that will have the symbol to replace, the new function, and the pointer to the old function. So this will replace the original operating system command with the Trojan operating system command, which is pretty powerful. All right. So Scicrypt is another instrumentation tool, and it can do all these great things: steal encryption keys, brute force local authentication. So, you know, a jailbroken iPhone is a whole lot less secure, much resembling Windows or Android with a rootkit in it. And that's the whole point, of course. You can do all sorts of things that Apple does not want you to do with your jailbroken phone, in principle. So, now these days, a lot of people are allowed to bring their home device and use it at work, which is, of course, a problem. So to avoid the security risk of this, companies issue you a company phone and try to make you use only the company phone, but that turns out to be extremely inconvenient and nobody wants to do it. So what they prefer to do is put mobile device management apps on your phone, which makes your phone into a controlled device like a member of a Microsoft Windows domain. So there's a central controlling server that can detect if you put forbidden apps on your phone or jailbreak your phone and so on. And so there's a variety of BYOD solutions, MDM solutions. Kaseya is one of the many products that came out to do this a long time ago, and this mobile device management system had a vulnerability. You could access the internal resources through a browser with no further authentication. And so, if I was able to compromise a mobile device, I could then attack the server at the company. So that's kind of fun. All right, and Frida is another instrumentation framework, which you can supposedly use without modifying your device. And I had some projects a couple of years ago that worked with Frida, but they don't work anymore. So I wasn't able to dig to the bottom of it. But Frida lets you modify the operation of apps. It's very nice when you can get it working. All right, so the dynamic linker loads a library into a process using this environment variable or that one on iOS. And so you can now inject a library here. All right. Doors for the good guys or doors for the bad? Yes, that's the problem, of course. That's why if you jailbreak your iPhone, Apple doesn't want to hear it. And of course, the security goes way down. The security becomes your job. And I think it is not easy to know what to do to secure it anymore. You open all these attacks. So iOS apps run in a sandbox. Remember, they don't run with different user accounts the way they do on Android, but they are run in some sort of isolated sandbox, and inter-process communication is prohibited with exceptions. To send signals from one app to another, you can use the clipboard, of course, called a pasteboard, protocol handlers, or extensions. So clipboard we know about. Just copy something and paste it into another app. The protocol handlers are these things here. This character string with a : / / and a URL. You can define a custom protocol handler, and for example, the App Store has this protocol handler. So any app can resolve a URL beginning with this protocol handler, and that will launch the App Store. And you can define a custom URL scheme, like my VoIP here, and then you'd have your offering to service any app can call this, and bring those in. And you can automatically load them on a web page with iframe. So you can have iframe source. This happened to Skype. Skype had a Skype protocol handler, happened on Android, it also happened on iOS, where you could just make a malicious web page that would then make a Skype call without you knowing it. On Android, they fixed it by making it always pop up a box before making any phone calls. And I don't know exactly what they did on an iPhone, but I suspect they did the same thing to deal with that. All right, then there's application extensions. These are things that can communicate between apps. So today, we'll let you view the notification center for your calendar alerts for today. There's a share extension to share content, and there's a custom keyboard you can call. So in an app, you open you start here. So I write to a shared resource. An app extension can write to the resource. And then I can open a URL, which will go over to this other app. You can have a request and response. So there's various ways. Your app extension can request and respond between two apps. That's what they're for. All right, so one password using the extension. Password managers clearly need this, right? They need some way to move the password from your password manager that has some kind of encrypted repository of passwords over to your browser or whatever you're trying to log in with. So one password used an extension, and a malicious app could request credentials for a different domain. And this is a problem. It's not clear how your one password can tell whether that app really should have access to those credentials. All right. And then there's code injection, the simplest attack. Any place user input comes into the device, you might be able to add special characters or overlong inputs or something and somehow be able to inject code in data that's just supposed to be like a message to send or a login credential or something. So for example, UI Web Views is the web renderer that you'd have in an app so you can view web content in an app, which is very common. It's built on WebKit, just like essentially all web browsers are now. And it supports JavaScript, and you cannot disable it. So you can have cross-site scripting attacks. If someone is able to inject script tags in the input, you can run cross-site scripting, and then you could steal content from the local system, from the browser. Skype had a script injection vulnerability, so you could inject into your name a script, and that could access the local file system and steal the address book. All right, and there's SQLite databases on an iPhone, and just like all forms of SQL, it can be vulnerable to SQL injection. So if you do have an app that doesn't filter the characters correctly or correctly implement the methods, then you can inject code, execute SQL. There is no way to get a command prompt, arbitrary code execution this way, but you can steal data out of databases with it. And there's XML. Since the web renderer will render XML, XML lets you define custom entities, and you can define a custom entity that repetitively calls another custom entity, that repetitively calls another custom entity, so it creates a denial of service attack like a zip bomb or a fork bomb. Zip bombs are an old trick where you make a zip file that will unzip into something too big, so it will crash whatever device you're unzipping it on, and a fork bomb will just fork processes and fork them again until it runs too many processes and causes your run out of RAM or you run out of CPU and your machine freezes up. And you can do the same thing with XML. You can make an XML page which cannot be rendered without doing a ridiculous amount of work. So that's another way to go. All right. And then there's file handling routines. If you have an app that lets you save something or open something on a local file system, then it has to take a file name from the user. And if it does, the user might be able to manipulate the directory if you don't have permissions set correctly. This is insecure direct object access. So for example, if I'm Joe, I can go to Documents, Joe pick, but if I can change the file name to Jane pick, and there are not permissions tied to the user, then I can change some other user's profile pic, not mine, or see some other user's private photos. So those are a few more of the type of vulnerabilities you'll see. All right, let's take a look at a Kahoot, which, oh, that's right, I lost my open browsers. All right. This is it. All right. All right, looks like that's it. All right, so which one defines a class structure? All right, that's the interface file. It defines the class structures. All right. Where are the pointers to the methods? All right, that's the dispatch table. All right, what plist file controls when an extension is loaded? Those are filters. All right. All right. What tool has JavaScript and Objective-C? Okay, that's Scicrypt. All right, and which item always allows JavaScript? All right, that's web views. All right, so, well, all right.